Welcome to the Hunting Beast Report, a live video podcast with Dan Infalt and host Jeremy Gillespie.
Dan, welcome back. Long time no see.
Hey, how you been?
Good, bad. Left a lot of tags unfilled. We can get into that if you want, but let's start off with two things. One, you sound a bit under the weather, so what's going on with that?
Yeah, after opening weekend of gun in Wisconsin, which was last weekend, Eric got real sick. Well, not last weekend, the weekend before. Eric got real sick, and then his wife got sick. His wife had to go to the hospital. She was so sick. And then my brother-in-law got sick that was with us, and then I got sick, and everybody else is getting sick. It's pretty bad. It's some strain of influenza A, but it was a little more wicked than COVID was, that's for sure.
Oh, that's no good to hear. So hopefully you're on the mend now.
I'm actually getting a lot better. I can talk and stuff again. So I can sit up and look at a computer screen. So,
oh, good to hear. Good to hear. It's hard to keep the beast down.
Yeah, I actually didn't hunt Sunday, and I got to be pretty sick not to hunt on that last day of the season. I had some big plans on where I thought a big buck was living and didn't get out.
Well, hopefully you got
but I still got my tag. I got a muzzleloader tag that lasts till next week, Tuesday, I believe.
Okay, so you got a little bit of time left.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're going to talk about Wisconsin gun season, but let's back up a little bit. So we've been gone for 2 weeks. You were in Iowa. I went to Kansas, and then did some mule deer hunting in Montana. But let's go back to Iowa. You put out a video, but it's always fun to get some behind the scenes, more in-depth information. Let's talk about your hunt. Just kind of recap that. And if for people that didn't watch the video, or for people that did, maybe add a little extra detail.
Yeah. I've been applying for a while. It took me 5 points this time to draw Iowa. This is a new area for me. I've been to southwestern. I've been to northeastern, and now it's to south central. And I mapped out a bunch of places I wanted to check out. And then a friend of mine, Scott Buckley, who's a very successful hunter in that area, told me I could stay with him, and it was right where I was looking at everything. And I went down there and started out just doing a lot of walking and stuff and looking at some stuff, and looked at some stuff that friends had suggested that I look at certain properties and stuff. Like you suggested something. Scott suggested a couple spots. And you saw the video of the first hunt, and we talked about that first hunt where I blew it with that really giant buck. Well, this time when I went back, I really had an intention to get back to the spot where I shot that big buck and hunt that area, because I had figured out something going on over there with the way the big bucks were traveling through there from two private properties. But when I was tracking that buck, and within a very short distance of the tree where I shot it, I got a picture sent to me by Whitetail Adrenaline, and they said that we got a picture of you tracking one, because I didn't have a bow or anything. And I said, yeah. And then, so when I went back down there, I had an inkling feeling, because of the buck activity there, that if they would probably be hunting there because of the stuff that was going on in that spot. So I called them on the way down and said, hey, are you guys planning on hunting that area? Because I put a lot of work into that area. And they said, yeah, we got 2 guys in there hunting right now. So then I had to kind of just figure something else out, because I'm not going to just jump in there with those guys, So I went to a different area and got up on a ridge. And I had kind of touched on that area in that first hunt, but I didn't really penetrate it too much. But I was starting to figure out that a lot of the deer were down low and people weren't looking low. everybody was looking up in the hills. And right off the bat, I dropped down into some like a lake that had dried up and turned into brush. It's usually underwater. And I kind of saw this oak island out there. All the other islands were like willow and small. This oak island was like a little bigger, and it was pinned up against a river. And there looks like some really good bedding behind it. I didn't actually even look at it on the map. So I was just walking along that ridge looking down there and thought, wow, that looks good. So I went down there, and the closer I got, the more and more sign I saw. And I got to the tip of this island, and there's just this beat trail. And I got set up, and as I'm setting up, a buck comes out chasing a doe with another doe chasing the buck. And they run into the brush in front of me. And the way that buck was acting, I figured there had to be something big in the area too. I mean, if there's a doe that hot, that was a little bit early yet. I'm thinking that there's probably going to be something big around, that it ain't going to be just that little guy that comes out. So it's kind of racing to get set up. And then shortly after getting set up, a pretty big buck came out of that brush, back a little ways. And I actually saw its antlers flash. It had really white antlers. And I got the camera on it a little bit, and it went up into the brush and kind of disappeared. And I didn't see it for a while. And also I looked down, and it was coming up the trail right to me. And it was going to walk right underneath me, but it hit the trail where that hot doe had ran through and turned and followed her. And it was on the other side of this willow brush where I couldn't shoot through it. And it came past me at about 20, 25 yards. And I was trying to grunt to it, but there was like 40-mile-an-hour winds. I don't think it could hear me. So I kind of really cranked on the grunt, and then it turned its head and kind of turned towards me. I didn't know if it was coming for the grunt or what, but it turned towards me, and then I lost sight of it behind some really thick trees. But that little patch of trees was kind of small. And if the deer went on this side, I'd see it. If it went on that side, I'd see it. But if it was behind the trees, I couldn't. So I'm waiting for it to step out. And like 10 minutes goes by and it never steps out. And I'm just about to give up, and I see the brush moving in front of me. And there's this doe coming through the brush in front of me, and it's staying in this really thick willow brush. And right away, I thought the only way she'd want to walk in that brush and not on the trail is if she's trying to get away from a buck. So I'm thinking he's following her. So I didn't say it in the video, but I'm pretty sure that that's the buck, that's the doe that the little buck was chasing. And just before she came out, before that buck even came out, when that buck went around the corner, a doe came running around the corner and ran off. And I don't think I got that on film, but I think that was the doe that was following the little buck that was chasing this doe. And anyway, she stayed in this brush for like 10 minutes, but kept looking back. But 10 minutes, I'm thinking that buck would have to be right here for 10 minutes and not moving forward. And I started to give up hope. And then another doe, because there's a lot of deer down there, another doe comes in from behind me, like to my right, and it's heading straight downwind to me. And as soon as it hits my wind, it blows real loud and just crashes off. And I'm thinking, well, that's that. And I look back over, and this doe ain't even paying attention to that. She's looking back. And then I hear this little grunt, just enough where I knew it was a grunt, but it wasn't very loud. I start looking, and I see him coming around the corner. And I hit him at 10 yards, 12 yards. And he came in, and I got the bow pulled back early because I figured if he got right underneath me, I'd have a hard time. And he was trying to shake that little doe out of the brush. And when he got in front of me, in line with me, what I saw was that buck was quartering to me, like coming at me. And I put the pin, and I glued the pin on the front shoulder tight because I wanted to, stay in the lungs, not get in the guts and liver. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I shot, and I watched that arrow hit exactly where I was aiming. And the buck made a really loud, roar when I shot him.
Yeah, I saw it in a video. It was a weird noise.
Yeah. So going back over this later on, what I figured out was what I thought I saw wasn't reality. Looking at the video, that deer was turned and perfectly quartering away from me. I needed to hold back a little. And a friend of mine who's really into hunting really kind of set me straight on that, because he had the same issues. He's the same age as me. He has the same eye problems. And he was telling me that he started hitting deer like that too. And he said he was watching my videos, and he said he wanted to know if when I pull that bow back, if I'm aiming the whole time. You know what I mean, with the pin?
Yeah.
I said, yeah. I said, I'm holding that pin right on the vitals until I have a shot. And he goes, that's what your problem is. He says, because, and it's absolutely true, as my eyes are getting older, what I'm having is I can focus on the pin and the deer's kind of a blur. I mean, I can still shoot exactly where I'm aiming, but the deer's a blur. Or I can focus on a deer and I can't see the pins. So what I need to do, what he said has been working for him, is I watch the deer, and when the deer gives me the shot, I get the pin on it, and then I concentrate on the pin, and then I shoot. And I think that'll work for me, but I haven't got to test that yet. But I ended up not getting that deer, and it was a really beautiful deer, real high tines, heavy rack, solid 150, I would say, at least. So it was kind of sickening. It was first day, first spot I went to hunt. But, after exhausting myself to make sure that the deer wasn't dead, which after looking at the footage, I knew. After following around forever, and it actually ended up was chasing does and stuff later on. We gave up on it finally, and then I went back to hunting. And then the first place I get into, I wanted to set up in a thermal hub where a bunch of valleys came together into a hole and then down a draw. And I went in there to as far as I could get to where the brush started. And I was just out of that swirling crap, but I stayed low. And I got to a point where all these trails came in there and went through there. And there was does bedded in there like crazy. They kept jumping out when I'd walk in there. So I knew it'd be good. I set up there, and I had 2 deer come in that I couldn't see that busted me, and because of that swirling wind crap. But then I had a deer come from directly downwind and start blowing. And I thought, well, that's that, But as the blowing started getting closer and closer, all of a sudden this doe comes out, and she's looking at me in the tree, blowing at me. And she walks past me, blowing at me, looking at me. And behind her is this pretty big buck. And I actually believe it was the same buck that I shot. It was the same area, and it sure looked like it. But it came by following that doe, and I didn't get a shot. It stayed just out of range. At one point, the doe ran underneath me to avoid him, and then circled back up into the brush, and he came following her, but he cut the corner when she turned back around. It didn't come close enough. And I was kind of a little gun shy after the first one, so I didn't try to push a 40-yard shot. And then I went in there the next morning to give it another shot. And the next morning, I'm sitting in this tree, and all of a sudden I hear, it was pretty quiet, and I hear this noise behind me, like antlers rubbing on bark. And I look, and I see the ass end of a buck, and his head's going up and down. He's rubbing his tree, but his head's blocked by trees. I can't tell how big he is. And he's kind of coming from an area I didn't expect. And the wind was in my face, so he didn't know I was there. But finally, he gets done working over his tree, and he steps out. And this thing's an absolute monster. He just had rows of tines. He had at least 6 up on each side and high tines. And he came by at about 45 or 50 yards and never really gave me a shot. And that deer was worked up and alone, where the rest of them were all with those. I know I could have grunted that buck in. And here I am, like, grunt call sitting on my front seat in the truck.
No.
Yeah.
And that had been working pretty good for you this year too.
Right. And that was late in the morning, and that buck went to the hillside where all these deer have been coming in and out of, and went straight up into the bedding, and it was almost 11 o'clock, and I figured he bedded down up there. And that's kind of a dead end way. And I waited quite a while to make sure he wasn't going to do a circle and come back out. He never came back out. I went back, got the grunt call and stuff, came back in there. I wasn't gone for very long at all. Got reset up. I actually moved my tree because I needed to get closer to the intersections where stuff was going on. And, you figure that out after you see deer moving, right? So I moved like 20 yards. That put me right in the middle of the crap. And then I got set up for that deer to come down. And then in the early afternoon, all of a sudden, turkeys started flying out of that woods. And you hear stuff crashing off in that woods. And I'm like, is there one chasing around up there or something? And all of a sudden, this dude comes walking out, stalking with a bow right through the bedding area. I'm pretty sure he chased that buck out the back door. So I finished the hunt. Didn't see nothing after that. And then I decided to try and hunt where that buck had come from. I was looking, there was like a pine forest up high, and there was a series of draws. And at the top of those draws, some of the draws came from private, some of them came from public, but there's like a peninsula, like a little area where if a deer was traveling through, he'd have to go through there. And I was convinced, based on the map on the phone, that that'd be the spot to be. So I went up there the next evening. I think I actually sat that spot where the big buck was one more morning or something. But I went back up on the top the next evening, really kind of excited to hunt that spot after I saw it on the map. And it's kind of funny because you look at those spots and you talk to Scott Buckley, who's hunted all that whole area. He's like, oh yeah, I shot a 160 up there. I shot a 170 up there. It's like everywhere I've been, he shot these giant bucks. It was almost laughable. But anyways, I got up there and I found a really good pinch, but I was kind of disappointed. There was like one big rub and one scrape, and they weren't really fresh. And it just didn't feel like there was a lot of sign for how good of a pinch that looked like on the map, So I was like, but I was there and I sat it. And I think I even said on video, in the hill country, it doesn't hold a lot of sign. And if those deer are just traveling through there, sometimes they're not laying sign. So you just got to kind of trust the terrain, especially in rut, that this is where they're going to travel through. And I hunted it. And I didn't see much till just before dark. Then I had a couple does go through. And then I had this little tiny doe come up over the top. And I hear this loud, deep grunt that lasts forever coming up behind her. And I'm like, what the hell? So I turned the camera on, and you just see this giant body come up out of the bottom. And you could hardly see the doe. She's, as she's going through the brush, but you could see that thing from a mile because how big it was and how dark it was. And it comes in following that doe, and it gets fairly close. And it starts coming my way for whatever reason. It's coming right at me. And it's got to take one more step and I can shoot it. So I draw the bow, and he turns around and goes back after the doe. And I was drawn for quite a while. And this is before I talked to my friend again. So I'm concentrating on that pin on him. And when I shot, opened up, and I had a good clear shot, I shot, and I don't know what happened, but I completely missed. And I couldn't see the arrow flight, so I didn't know what happened. But, you didn't hear no thud or anything. And the deer just keeps walking, it just starts walking again. And I'm like, what just happened? And then I'm wondering if something's wrong with the bow, or I'm thinking, well, maybe, I dropped it out of the last tree I was in. I hung it on a branch. The branch broke.
Oh,
I'm like,
geez.
did I knock something loose, or, and I knocked another arrow. I drew back again, but I got that doubt in me again. And a lot of times I don't perform well when that creeps in, you know what I mean? And I contemplated letting the bow back down and just not even shooting, but I didn't. I shot. I took the shot of him quartering away from me hard, and I aimed like for where his last rib was, to quarter into that far shoulder. And the shot sounded good. It made a really good thud sound, and that thing did a mule kick, and he was jumping up and down, and he barreled up over the hill and disappeared. And then I thought I heard him make like a death moan, when it all went silent, like, oh, kind of, you sometimes hear that. It's not very often, but every now and then you get that.
Yeah.
And I was pretty sure he was dead over the top. And the doe just came walking right up to my tree, looked at me in the tree, just fed underneath me. I even said hi to her. She just walked away. And then I get down and I go over to where that buck was standing. I can't find no blood, which is reasonable if I hit it where I was aiming, right? Because the arrow would be up high. There would be no exit, So I look around. I don't find no blood. Kind of find a couple turned over leaves and stuff. So I go up to where I saw it last, and I find some blood spray. Some pretty heavy blood spray. It's like splashes for about 6 feet. And then it completely stops again. And I went up and down this trail all over the place. And I almost thought that has to be like the lung blood coming out of his nose and mouth, because like he exhaled there and blew it out because of where that wound should be, and the fact that there was no blood before or after that. So then I wasn't real positive on the hit. I didn't see it. I decided to just back out till morning. So I backed out first thing in the morning. We went back out there, and I go out there with Scott, and I'm like, it ran over this hill, and it should be over there. And that hill was on private. And we get over that hill, and that woods is completely mature. And where I thought that deer should be laying, you could see for an eighth of a mile. And there ain't no deer laying over there anywhere. Start trying to look for blood, go back to where that cough blood was and look around, and no blood, no blood, no blood. And there's like a bush there, and I had marked that from the tree, and I'm like, he went past that bush and over that hill. So I was looking down there, and then all of a sudden Scott yells, Dan, it's over here. I go, and here, it had veered over a different hill, and I wasn't even looking over there, and it was only 80 yards from the tree, and all the blood that was at the death site was out of my nose and mouth, like I thought. The arrow was exactly where it should have been. So that was a pretty cool moment.
Yeah, it sounds like a fun hunt, and a lot of good takeaways there. The only time I've heard that noise that you're talking about, one of the bucks I shot, it was like a low heart shot, and very similar experience. Not a lot of blood, and then there was kind of some spray, and you could tell it looked like it fell down and maybe like plowed on its chest for a little bit, and then another 50 yards I found it. But same thing, made that weird, kind of death groan like a bear would do almost.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. So filling an Iowa tag, filling your Wisconsin bow tag. That's a good transition.
Well, when that happened, my intentions was, if I filled that tag, is not to come back and go back to work or anything like that. I was just going to run straight to Nebraska and hunt. But I was kind of shook up about my shooting. And I was kind of run down. I had twisted my ankle, and I was kind of beat up. So I came home and rested, but I still feel a little guilty about not running to Nebraska. I really think I could have did something there too.
Must be the season to get beat up. I just had a buddy that was out to mule deer hunt, and I think it was the first. No, maybe it was the second day he was out. He stepped on his knee weird, and then his knee swelled up like a balloon. So he's pretty, bummed up right now and been icing his knee. I think he's trying to get into the doctor this week because might have something going on there long term, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think I got something going on with like my hamstring or something. You know that lower half of your leg, the big muscle in the lower half.
Yeah,
something in there. If I just step wrong, I pull something in there and it just hurts really bad, and then I can hardly walk. And I've had it happen a few different times now. It's in the one leg, you know.
sounds like the Bucks aren't the only thing getting beat up during the rut this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about two other things. So you mentioned Nebraska. You haven't made it back there, but before Nebraska and after Iowa, Wisconsin's gun season, I haven't had a chance to watch your Icy Orange People video yet. I've been hunting pretty hard. So what give me a recap. How'd that go and who came out? How'd you guys do?
So I I really like inviting somebody from a different group, here and there. And this time we invited Zeke Outdoors. Zeke and his dad came out to hunt with us. And then it was just the regular guys after them. But very first drive we did, we put a young guy who's been hunting with us for a while. But he went away to college, and then he hasn't hunted with us in a while, and he just started coming back last year. And he shot a few does with us, but he's never gotten a buck ever. We put him over in a corner, and we did a drive. And the only thing that came out was an 8-point buck, and it ran right to him, and he was on the ground. And the buck ran right up to him, like trotting, until it saw him and stopped and like eyeballed him like that, and
Yeah.
he had it like 15 feet from him, and he shot it, drilled it 20 gauge. So he was excited. That was his biggest buck.
Nice.
So we got that thing field dressed, got it loaded up, and we went on to the next drive. And there was somebody sitting where we always do the drive, and people see you and they kind of take your spots. But we just decided to do the other side of that area, the same area, do a drive over there. And then we check to see if this guy had left yet before, because we won't drive an area if there's a guy in there, obviously.
Sure.
So we go drive this other area. And at the same time, we run into these guys coming out, and they're acting really weird, and they said they shot a doe in there. You got to get it to the meat locker right away. And they left all their equipment out there, but they'd be right back. I'm like, okay. They said, you're going to do a drive? I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, we'll be right back before you're even done with the drive. Okay. So then they go past me, and they didn't have a doe with them, but their truck was parked on the side. So we get up there, you see their climber stand with a coat hanging on it and some other stuff up there in a gut pile. And then my kid, James, who decided to bow hunt this year during gun season, he wanted to get another bow buck. He calls me and he says, hey, you guys doing P&A? He goes, you guys doing this certain area? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, I just ran into a couple guys up there. He goes, my friend Joe arrowed a doe, and it ran over this hill. And we went to track it. There was no gunshots. It only got 50 yards. And there's a guy field dressed, and he says it's his deer, and he shot it. And he goes, when I'm talking to him, I'm like, it's still got the arrow in it. And he goes, the guy grabs the deer and takes off. And the other two kind of blocked us. And we were like, hey, it's not your deer. We shot it,
Oh, boy.
And they took the doe away from him. So anywho, I just told him, that's hunting. You don't want to argue or fight with people like that. It's just a doe. It's just a deer. Just let them have it.
Yeah.
Wisconsin law does allow you to, like if somebody else shoots a deer or something, if you're the last one who shoots at it, if you hit it, it's your deer, but they didn't even shoot at it. Then I wasn't too sure what to think about it. I thought, well, maybe they, in excitement, they didn't know that they heard the shot or something. Then later, those guys were bragging on Rut Report about taking the deer from them, you know.
Really?
And then, they got beat up by it, and then their post got taken down.
Jeez.
But we went and did that drive, and the only thing that came out was a coyote, and I shot that. It came running in, caught my wind, turned around, ran back out, and went to circle. And at 75 yards, I went through a little opening, and I dropped it. And then a little while later, it tried getting up. It must have been like its back was broke or something. Tried getting up, and I put one through its neck. And I was going to keep the cape, but that blew the whole back end of it out. So, but got a coyote on that one. So then when we got back out, that dude was gone. So we went to do the drive that we like to do. And we set up Zeke on a hillside, and I went and sat on the stand, and Jeff Trudell sat on the ladder where he always sits. And Eric took a bunch of guys around, and he was going to push the bedding area. Now, in that video, I got a lot of heat about the way Eric shot. I deleted messages that were full of hate, but so you don't see a lot of it. I just delete them and block people that, it's all right to question things, but I mean, when people are just hateful, you just remove it. But I got a lot of heat for the way he shot, and I can see why when you look at the video. But the video don't paint the picture. What you see on video doesn't look like you see through your eyes. It's a valley, and you could see everything in front of you. And the hunters are on the sides, and the valley is open in the front. And every person's done that drive before. We know where the people are. We know where we can shoot. And Eric had a good buck get up in front of him, and he shot it at 5 times. He hit it, but it ran across private. It actually ran really close to Jeff, but he couldn't shoot it because it was on private. And ran across the road onto some more private. And it had some blood spray coming out of it that I think it was lung shot. So I think it was pretty much dying. And shortly after that, the neighbors come down in a UTV and drive up to Jeff and start yelling at him for hunting 30 or 40 yards from their border or whatever, where they just got a little tiny, that particular landowner has a little tiny property on the public. But they just yelled a little and went back. Yeah, but when they came out too, they kicked up a whole bunch of deer that would have went through the drive. But one of them did go past Zeke and his dad shot it, and it was a really big doe. But then shortly after those guys left, the next deer up was a really nice 10-pointer. Came flying out and came flying past Jeff, and Jeff dropped it at the base of his ladder. I mean, I think it was a couple paces from his ladder. And that was his biggest buck ever.
Oh, nice.
So he was really excited. And then we drove a little piece by the parking lot, and we got 4 does. And that pretty much ended our day because all the deer we had to drag out.
Yeah, that's a lot of action.
Right. So the next day was a little tougher. Most of the stuff we got into, people had been into or they're not normally into. We found gut piles and cell cams and tree stands, and where people normally don't go. We kicked up 1 doe, and Zeke's dad tried to set up Zeke on, and Zeke missed. And then we got to the last drive of the day, and we went to a good area, and it was the last time Zeke could come with us. And it was really Eric's time to be in a good kill position, because we kind of rotate who gets to, hunt where. And Eric said, I'd really rather see Zeke and his dad go home with something nice. Why don't you put them over there? And we did. And before they even started the drive, as soon as the wind hit the area, a pretty big buck, probably a 4-year-old, but not the most giant rack. It was a 7-point rack, but it had no brow tines. The brow tines were like busted off. it came flying out through the grass past them, and Zeke's dad shot it. It went down. It started getting up, and he handed the gun to Zeke, and Zeke finished it off. And then I called him, said he's celebrating a couple minutes. Get back to your spot in case another one comes out. And,
Sure.
I said they're just starting to drive, So they finished the drive, and the only other thing to come out is I heard all this brush moving, and everybody started yelling. There's one going for Dan. So I just got real quiet, and I thought I was going to get some really cool footage because there's a trail in front of me coming right to me. And I put the camera on a stump and had it recording. And I could see the cattails moving coming right at me. So I got down real low, and I'm thinking this thing can run right up to me a couple feet, and I can just jump up and shoot it. And it gets to the edge of the cattails and stops. Then all of a sudden it busts out of the cattails and it goes off to the side, and it's a coyote, but a huge coyote.
Huh.
So big that when it was going through the cattails, it sounded like a deer. I took 2 shots and I missed. And that was it for opening weekend. So I didn't get a deer. All I shot at was coyotes, but everybody else in the party except for I think Jason got shooting. And got deer. I mean, Jason got one of the does, and we split up the meat pretty good. And then Eric got sick, then he got the flu, and then his wife got sick, and we didn't get back out until I think it was Friday. I think me and Dave and Eric got out one day. Did a little pushing in some remote areas where you got to be pretty experienced to get in there. So I just wanted to be those guys. And we kicked some deer around, but we were always just off just a little bit from going past a shooter. And we really couldn't see what they were, but we knew some really big stuff from bow hunting was living there. So then on Friday, we got the group back together. And this time, Kurt came, the guy who lets us use his building for the workshops. And he brought his young son, Will, who's only taken a couple deer. And one of the guys that only ever comes second weekend because he goes up north opening weekend, Jerry, he asked if he could bring somebody from his church. He brought a person from his church. And we set up her in a spot where the deer usually shoot across this little canal. And 2 years in a row, we had deer back doors through there. And we're thinking they're probably good bucks. And we put Will covering the backside of the swamp. And I went up on this dike. And Eric took a couple guys. And he went way back in the marsh to push this out. And deer flew out of that like you wouldn't believe. I had about 5 deer go past me. I shot 2. I shot 2 does. Got that out of my system.
Yeah.
And one little buck went past me. And then it went to the person Jerry brought along. And she shot it in the foot. And then it ran over by Will. You got to remember, she's a first-time hunter.
Okay.
And then it ran over by Will. And Will finished it off. And he was happy as hell. So, pretty cool season, I think. I'd really like to have gotten out Sunday, but I ended up getting sick.
Well, Dan, let's talk about a couple things there. And one of the things you mentioned, first-time hunter. If anyone that's listening that's never been on a deer drive, usually you're shooting at running or at least trotting deer. So I'd be curious to know what kind of are you in a shotgun only or rifle zone, and what kind of shotgun or rifle do you use, and do you use scope or no scope? What kind of setup do you like for a deer drive gun?
So for me, and I get a little heat for this, but I like an AR. I like my 223. I wouldn't mind experimenting with getting one in like 300 blackout or something. But a 223, if you got the right ammo. What I found is like nozzlers with those
like a partition bullet
tips.
Yeah,
those things. Oh my gosh, do they knock things over. They go in like a pinhole and leave a softball size hole on the other side. They stop a deer pretty quick. It ain't like people think. But what I like about it on a drive is it doesn't have recoil, and I just hold on a deer, and just every time I have a shot, when he busts brush, I can squeeze another one off into him, and I'm pretty accurate with it. So I like that, and I like having a lot of shots because that way anybody wounds something or something, I'm not reloading. You can we rarely ever lose a deer. I mean, that's another misconception. You know, a lot of my hate messages are, you guys are wounding deer if you're doing drives. There's dead deer all over. That's not true. If we want to kill a deer, it seldom gets out of our drive. You know, on the case where Eric's got to cross the road, and I think I forgot to say this, but when it went across the road, a police officer drove by us in an unmarked car, waved at us while we're looking at the blood going across the road. And I looked up the landowner on that property, and I told Eric, you should probably go over there alone, because if we go over there as a group, there's no way they're going to give us permission. But just go over there alone. Just say you shot one, ran on her. Can you retrieve it? And he did, and they said no. And it turned out the sheriff that drove by lives there.
Really?
It's pretty surprising. A law enforcement officer wouldn't let us on there. Didn't even want to hear Eric's information in case he found it. He's just like, nope, leave. You know,
yeah,
so.
that's something I never understand. I mean, if it's a wounded deer, like what are you going to do with it? Just leave it there, or you're going to go get it? I don't know. That one always is a head scratcher for me.
We don't watch on, or we hunt. Well, a hunter should know enough that you know. I mean, I hunt, and I'd be pretty protective. Like if when we had Dave's land, we had people that would shoot something and run onto the property. Now, I don't really want to go in my bedding area. I don't want somebody to kick through there just before I'm going to do a hunt or something. But I'd want permission to go get my deer if it went someplace. So I was always, let's go get it.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, even if you're protective, you can always escort, a single person and make sure they're on blood. Like there's ways to go about it and, get the deer out of there without mucking it up too bad. But yeah, I don't know. Like I said, obviously that's their right, but that stuff always confuses me.
That's the nice thing about Iowa. You can just go over and get it. It's the law there.
Yeah. Kansas is the same way. As long as you don't take your weapon, you have to have a blood trail, but you can track on a private with no weapon if you can demonstrate you had a blood trail coming off the public.
I got a glimpse of Eric's buck, and it was pretty big.
Yeah,
it would have been the biggest buck shot.
Oh geez. Well, that sounds like a fun time. I back home used to do some deer drives around Thanksgiving, and people have never done it. Like I said, it's kind of fun. There's some strategy that goes on it. Like you said, it's real helpful if you know the piece. If you could take advantage of kind of wind bumping the deer out, that's a good tactic. And you mentioned it. You had some history on some properties where you have known escape routes, and a good place to put posters, where people are driving to the posters. So a lot of good tips to be taken away there. And it's fun. Something different after sitting in a tree all year.
Yeah. What we found over the years is the biggest tip I could give people is that when you jump little deer, they scatter. When you jump big bucks, old bucks, they either run into the wind or wind to back, and usually it's wind to back, but it's one of the two. Most of the time they do that. That's not to say you don't get one that runs out crosswind sometimes when they're cornered or something, but if you're on a drive, even if a spot looks stupid, that downwind side is the good side, or the upwind side. And we always take the guys that are going to be upwind of the deer and put them in last, because some deer will jump when they smell you. Some won't jump until you step on them, but some will jump when they smell you. So if the wind's blowing towards the drivers, we'll put the drivers in first. If it's blowing towards the standers, we'll put the standers in first, and the drivers will have to wait till the standers are all set up before they go in.
Have you ever had
that's worked out really well?
Have you had the experience where bigger bucks, especially in the type of terrain you hunt, the cattails in the marsh, it seems like sometimes those bucks, they don't want to move until you stop. Like even if you're close to it, maybe let's say 30, 50 yards in cover. If you're on a steady walk, it seems like a lot of times, maybe not a lot of times, but
Oh yeah,
sometimes.
you don't want to walk steady.
Yeah,
You want to walk about 20 yards and stop and just sit there for a minute.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I think that's a good tip that's overlooked.
And yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And what I found is a lot of times is that first step. After you sit there for a while, that first next step, it's like they get this panic going that you're around them somewhere and they don't know exactly where you are. When you make that first noise, they seem to explode. Another thing is too, you got a lot of guys, and I see this all the time when we run into other people driving. You hear them hooting and hollering and yelling, like here deer, go, 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 and stuff because they want to make those deer move. The only time our drivers will yell something is if they put a deer up and they want to alert everybody. Otherwise you're quiet because you want to catch those deer completely off guard. Because what happens is the deer will plan. If he hears you coming from a long ways, he will either lay down tight and let you pass him. He'll try sneaking ahead of you and sneaking out somehow. But if you catch him completely off guard and all of a sudden you're right there, they just get up 90 miles an hour, fly out, and that's what you want. You want a panicked reaction where they don't have time to think about an escape.
No, that's another good point there. A lot of nuances, and that's the stuff you pick up over the years from doing it or being observant while you're out there doing it. So that's like I said, fun thing to do.
You kind of look at the terrain and you can kind of say, okay, they're going to jump from there and they're going to jump from there, and you actually can start to know where they're going to jump from too.
Well, Dan, we're at 45-ish minutes, so this will be the heads up to anyone that wants to ask a question. Go ahead and start putting your questions in the chat. If you want to help me out, put a question mark at the front end of the question. That'll help me see it easier. And then a couple of things before we get into the Q&A. We mentioned Nebraska a little bit. I don't know the regs there. Can you go back there? How long's the season go, and are you planning to go back at all?
I don't know how long it lasts. I do believe there's a late season. I know they've already had their gun season. But I do have a tag. You can't buy one anymore, but I still have one. So I could end up there. We'll see. It might happen. I think with snow on the ground, some of those places I looked at could be kind of interesting. Because you'd see all the sign. I don't know how much snow they get there. That was pretty warm when we were out there.
Yeah, the weather this year for Montana was abysmal for rifle season. It was bad. It was warm, way too warm, no snow.
I woke up this morning, it was 10 degrees here.
Well, trending in the right direction then.
Yeah.
And then we had a question before we got rolling, Dan, a good admin thing to cover. We've been doing the shows because of hunting season starting at 8 p.m. Central. Zeke Outdoors was wondering if we were going to move that now that the season's winding down to 7 Central. I said I'd check with you and we'd let everybody know. So
I'd be okay with that, actually.
Okay. Well, we'll starting next week then. Let's plan on 7 Central, which is 8 Eastern, 6 my time. That works for me too.
Okay, that sounds good to me. The 8 o'clock thing was because of hunting hours.
Yeah. Yeah. Now daylight savings, it's dark pretty early. Everyone should be back. So we'll plan on kicking off at 7.
One more thing before you get to questions is I just wanted to mention this book. I've been friends with the Sensenbrenners, and maybe many you probably recognize that name. Jim Sensenbrenner was a politician in Wisconsin here. His son writes a lot, and he wrote a new book about the outdoor legends, which is all the top people in hunting, like old people like Fred Bear and Jack O'Connor and Ernest Hemingway and all the Leopold. He wrote all their stories in a book, and it's kind of cool. If anybody wants something for a Christmas gift, I told him I'd give him a shout out. I'm not getting anything out of this. I just like the guys. We can probably stick a link in the description below. But make a good Christmas gift if you're looking for something for a hunter.
All right. Yeah, that's cool. Sure. It sounds like a lot of good stories. I liked reading old books when I first got into, before the internet was as big as it is now, when I first started getting hunting, I read, and I talked to you in one of the podcasts, that Bob Frotsky, he was a big buck killer from back in the day. I read his books, and I had some archery books that my girlfriend's dad had that I read. Some old Fred Bear stories when they were hunting polar bears on the ice, flying in with a plane and shooting with a recurve. That stuff's crazy. So some of those stories from back then are pretty wild. So it's good stuff to read. Okay, let's get into the questions here. First, just a funny comment. Dave Carroll says I sound like Norm Macdonald. So that's Dave. I'll try to maybe work on my Norm impression even more for next episode. So I guess there's worse people I could sound like. Norm Macdonald. Rip Norm, pretty funny guy.
Well, sound like me. I ain't even got a voice today.
Yeah, you sound like Kermit the Frog today. So we got Norm and Kermit today. Let's get in the question. So Dan, and this came up earlier, but you were using, as you described, your potato camera. SF asked, what kind of camera does Dan use? I know your one that you're having issues with is a Sony. What's your potato?
My potato is a Canon.
Okay.
A Canon Vixia, but it's a bigger model. It's like the newer model. It's full size. I actually think, for what it's worth, I mean, it's $1,000 camera, so it's got to have a way to make the quality better. I just haven't figured it out. I think it might be turned way down or something. And I got to figure that out. But I got the Sony now, and this thing works pretty good.
Dan, we got to get you a better webcam too, because your webcam's a little potatoy.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I got that for like $5.
If you want to upgrade, pretty reasonable, a little more than $5, but I'm using the Elgato face cam, and that one does 1080, so it's a little better quality. I can send you a link if you want.
All right.
Nate Peterson, Dan, don't use a 30-06, or is it a 308, your other gun? And I'm assuming he means not your driving gun, because we talked about driving gun, you use an AR, but what do you use if you're not on a drive?
30-06 pump.
Is that old Remington, like 7600 or something?
Yep.
Yeah. That's in the 90s, 80s and 90s, super popular gun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does it got the engraving on the receiver? That was always cool too.
I don't know. I think it's sitting on my back seat. I don't think it has engraving on it.
Okay. Let's see. Oh boy, I lost where I was at here. We'll get back here. Canyon Harbin, do you still have confidence hunting mature bucks in the late bow season? And I'm going to expand on Canyon's question a little bit for him. If you do, what's your go-to type of setup in the late season, Dan? So do you have confidence in where do you hunt them at?
Yeah, late season is one of the best times to hunt big bucks, in my opinion. It's how do you say it? It's good and bad. The good is you can get on deer real easy. You can get on big bucks real easy. The bad is that they can figure you out real quick because there's no cover. I mean, it's really hard to find a good hiding spot. It's hard to get close to them. They'll bed to watch, especially if there's snow on the ground. There's no leaf cover. Everything gets knocked flat. So it can be really hard to get close to them. It can be hard to not stick out in little trees. But the deer in late season are going to be where there's food, which sounds like a cliche. And everybody will ask me, well, what food are they on? What food are they on? And really put that right out the window. Drive around and find food at public properties and go look for tracks is what you got to do. When there's snow on the ground, it's real easy. Now, I know a lot of the people that are watching this probably don't have snow, and then they got to go do a little more research, like looking for tracks and sign and glassing. But literally all the deer in late season, once food is scarce and they start, all they think about is putting on as much food as they can. They'll huddle around food, they'll bed near food, and they'll be in large groups. And that's one of the downfalls too, because I found groups of them that are really big, and you might have 5 shooters in the group, and you might have 50 that aren't. And then you're sitting in a tree trying to look like a toothpick in a poplar tree that's perfectly straight, trying to blend in when there's 30 deer got to go past you before the one you want to shoot goes past, and not have them smell where you walked. And so it can be tricky. But because of the fact that they're really locking on those food sources and they're traveling to those food sources, it can be good too. One of the other problems is you can do a lot of scouting and not find anything before you find that food source where they are at. There's going to be a lot of dead zone. But if you put the work in, it can be pretty rewarding. The trouble with putting the work in is it sounds really good like earlier in the season when you talk about it, but when late season gets here, you have really short days, and if you're trying to do this and work and do it after work and stuff, you really don't have much time in a day of daylight to get on these deer and scout. But it can be pretty rewarding.
Yeah. Sprinkle in a little of my own personal experience real quick. I don't have a lot of late season experience, but you touched on a lot of things that worked for me. In 2019, I had a North Dakota tag, and I struggled in North Dakota because there's not much habitat, and I was over there 2 or 3 times prior to late season. It just was really struggling. And a long story short, I found a standing cornfield about a half mile off some public ground, and it was great because North Dakota is pretty open, or a lot of it is, and the bedding cover was on the public and the cornfield was on the private, and there was a pretty good distance. They couldn't bed right next to it. And it seemed like every deer for 3 miles was in that area. And just like you said, kind of tough and kind of like early season. You might only get 1 or 2 cracks, but if you play your cards right, it's a pretty high odds hunt.
Right.
So Dan, Mark Zink says, Dan, how are you hunting this time of year? So I think we just covered that. So we're gonna skip that one. Basically, you're looking for food sources and travel routes from the nearest bedding to those food sources, right?
Yeah, actually, like right now, I'm really going deep and trying to get away from everybody because of gun season. But in a week or two, I'll start, as the guns stop, start going away, and the pressure goes down. Then I'll start looking at those food sources. Like I still got a muzzleloader tag, and this week I plan on hunting some certain spots that are really remote as soon as my health is a little better, and trying to get a certain buck that I've been after that I think is pushed back into an area.
Let's see. Bobber Down says dogwood / grassy swamp bedding, hunting edges of Oak Islands and the fingers up to the bedding, seeing lots of does, almost no bucks. What am I missing?
Just probably ain't a lot of bucks. Just keep moving around till you find them.
Yeah.
The biggest thing is that if you're not seeing bucks that you're looking for, you got to keep moving. You got to move until you find them. I mean, there's nothing wrong with giving a spot a couple of hunts if you're seeing a lot of deer and seeing if there's one around. But there really isn't big bucks everywhere. And especially after the gun seasons, a lot of them are dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the good things about hunting early, because you got as many good bucks as you're going to have on opening day all year. Yeah.
I mean, what gets killed in Wisconsin, it's got to be, a couple 100,000 deer. There's a good chance the deer you're after got shot.
Yeah, and I imagine it's similar to Michigan. I remember seeing harvest stats: 25 to 30% of the deer population every year is harvested. So, if it's similar in Wisconsin, and I think they both have big herds, that's a huge number of deer.
Yep.
Jay asked, Dan, can we get some milkweed scent control T-shirts?
We used to have one.
Maybe I'll see what I can do on that.
There you go.
Let's see what else we got here. Dan, I hear you. This is from Kyle Schmitz. Dan, I hear you predict a deer's class score on the hoof. How do you do that? So how do you know it's a 130, 150, 180? What are you looking at on the hoof?
You just get based on the frame and things. I mean, sometimes I underestimate them, sometimes I overestimate them. It's just a guess.
And Kyle, one thing I would say,
looking at the mass, the time, how you see enough relax, you start to get better at it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If you haven't ever seen a deer officially scored, and I'm not talking about your friend with the Stanley tape measure. I'm talking about an official, either Boone and Crockett or Pope and Young score, and see what the measurements are, where they're taken. A lot of people don't know. You have to take the smallest mass measurement between each point, and a lot of guys measure from the center of the beam to the tip of the tine when it's actually the top part of the beam. There's a lot of small differences, but once you see a deer scored and see how it's done correctly, if you got some deer kicking around, you can score your own or score a friend's deer if they get one. You get a lot better idea. And then for me, the most helpful thing is just having a frame of reference. Like, Dan, you've shot what, 30, 40, 50 nice bucks, probably across the whole spectrum of the score class. So then you've got some sort of frame of reference. Like, oh, this looks like, this, the Rome Legend buck or the 300-pound slob, whatever. So you've got some frame of reference, and that's real helpful too.
The biggest thing is too is people that just look at the frame or whatever got no idea. I mean, I've had people say, you say you shot a really nice 140 class, and people will say 140 ain't even a nice buck. 140 on an 8 frame is a pretty big buck.
Really big.
But 140 on a 10 isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great point too.
If it's actually 140, yes.
They always say G4s make scores, right? So a 10 frame that's a 148, you put G4s on it. Well, if they got 5-inch G4s, then you got a 150. So it makes a difference. Kyle Peg asked, do you find it hard to find sign when the ground is frozen with no snow? So before it snows, but it's cold out.
Yeah, it can be hard. Mm-hmm.
What do you do in that situation? Let's say right now we're. Go ahead, Dan.
You got to be able to pick up the subtle clues. You got to be able to look for the tracks, the broken ice, the broken snow, you got to be able to tell that something's been walking there recently. You can do that if you've looked at it enough, and if you're patient enough and you slow down enough. You can see where deer are feeding. You can see where they're biting off nubs. I'll often look at the ends of the plants that they're eating and see if it's fresh or if it's dark. Things like that. The trouble is, if you're getting in that close, they're also knowing you were there. Yeah. So generally, if I'm finding sign like that and it's fresh, I'm setting right up. So I'm trying to do it from a distance. If you really can't find a sign and you're having a difficult time telling, I think I would spend more time at this time of the year glassing than I would hunting. And I think even if you kind of know where the deer are, it does not hurt you to glass, because I find that those big bucks seem to come out a little different than all the other deer. And if you sit back and watch, you might pick a different tree than you would have if you went down there and didn't watch. And a lot of times you get one crack and they know you're on them. So that observation sitting late.
Hey, Dan, did you mute yourself in accident?
In a lot of cases.
Did you hit a button there? I can't hear you now.
You can't hear me?
No, I can. You're cutting in and out a little bit.
I don't know what happened.
No, you're good. You're good now. You're good.
Okay.
Dan, we'll do one or two more here. Team Pines and Tines. Dan, would you rather hunt pinch points of deer crossings on a creek bed early season, leaving bedding, or hunt food sources on public? So early season, I think I know what your answer is, but are you hunting pinches or food sources?
My thoughts about hunting and where to hunt almost always revolve around bedding. And it's hard for a lot of people to grasp on that. I mean, I get asked all the time what food source, pinch points and stuff. But even when I'm looking at pinch points, I'm looking at where do they bed, where are they traveling to and from, and why. I want to get them in daylight, and a lot of big bucks, even in rut, even in early season, are not moving long distances in daylight. You got to get up against where they're bedding. So, I mean, food is important, because if you know where they're eating, they're going to be in that area. Pinch points are important, but if you're in the middle of an open hardwoods, a quarter mile from any bedding, they're useless unless one gets a bug up his butt and goes for a long run. You really got to push to bedding. So for me, that's always number one.
No, I want to touch real quick. I went to Kansas for a rut hunt, and I was there a little earlier than I normally go, about 8th to the 15th, I think, this year. And one, it was hot. I could have hunted in my Hawaiian shirt the whole time. It was about 70 degrees. Mornings were okay, like 40s. I think we had 1 or 2 days in the upper 30s. But the bedding, and so in years past, just by chance, I've been drawing every other year. So I was there 22, 20, and 18. And it must have been the same crop rotation. I think they do mostly beans and corn there. And a lot of the stuff where I had been hunting or picked out spots was corn. And this year it was all beans and it was warm. And none of the spots had what I would consider like primary bedding. They're all kind of rut cruising. And with the warm temperatures and the crop rotation, it was just deader than dead. So that's I guess a good example of why bedding is important. So I'm probably not going back to those units for that reason, because most of the good bedding's on private. And so I'm going to be, if I go back to Kansas, I'm going to be looking at probably going to some different units where I can be sure that I can get on some, good doe or buck bedding, because that was a big eye opener this year. It made the hunting much worse.
I know Josh was down in Kansas this year, and he sent me some messages when he was down there that there's bucks running around everywhere. So wherever he was good.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, it is though. It's a matter of being close to the bedding.
Yeah, it was rough. And then the last week here, I had a Montana mule deer tag, and I had 2 friends out, and the one I was talking about bummed his knee up. He ended up getting a deer, and then my other buddy shot a really nice buck. Here, I'll pop a picture of it real quick. He got a 5x7 that at first we thought it was like low 150s, and then we ended up scoring it, and actually scored 168. So real nice mule deer. And I hunted hard for, I don't know, 8 or 9 days, and I ended up hiking over 100 miles, and the numbers were just way down this year. Kind of like you were talking about, we didn't have early snow, and we didn't have a very cold temperatures. Like most of the rifle season was 40, 50 degrees. And in the spots that I've found over the last 5 years since I moved to Montana, seemed to need cold and snow. So pretty tough hunt this year. Saw a lot of 2, 3, maybe a couple 4-year-old bucks. I passed, 10 different 4x4 bucks looking for a big one. But that's the thing. It's a good thing I'm not a gambler, Dan, or I'd be broke, because I just kept gambling until the last day and didn't find what I was looking for. But that's how it goes sometimes.
One thing I didn't say was Ricky shot a really good buck with his bow in Wisconsin. He didn't get very good film. Then he went down and he hunted with that outfitter again, where he shot that big buck last year.
Yeah.
And he shot a 160 class buck down there.
Oh, nice.
And
nice. Good for him.
Back, and he got a buck with his gun too, kind of a small one, but he got a buck with his gun too. So we'll be putting a video up of Rick pretty soon.
Oh, congrats to Rick. That's a season to remember for sure.
Mm-hmm. He seems pretty pumped up about it.
Oh yeah, I would be too. Well, Dan, let's wrap it up here. Just to recap, we're gonna start next week, 7 p.m. Central, and we did talk about, I didn't mention this yet, but we did talk about getting an email going so we can have some live guests. So I'm gonna have that set up for next week. We'll give more details about how to get some people on if they want to ask their questions in person over the video. So we're going to give that a trial run next week. We'll probably keep it to 2 or 3 people just in case that gets messy. But we're going to try to implement that. And then I think going forward, we talked about this before, we're going to try to do some, as the season winds down here and we get into winter and spring, we're going to try to do some map reading and like seminar type stuff on here as opposed to just season recap and Q&A. So anybody that's looking forward to that stuff, make sure you join once the season winds down, and we'll have some fresh stuff coming your way.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week, 7 p.m. Central Time.
See ya.